And just give me a second just
Second.
so we can get it going. You'll hear a recording start.
Sure. Okay, well, good morning. My name is Dina Falbo, and I'm the chair of the Colorado Board of Mortgage Loan Originators. Today is Wednesday, July 19th, and the time is 9 a.m. This is a public meeting of the Colorado Board of Mortgage Loan Originators, and we will now call this meeting to order. Let's begin by having Division Director Waters perform our roll call.
Dina Falbo.
Here.
Jennifer Mextroth.
Here.
Shirley Thielen.
Here.
Aaron Saladay.
Here.
Cindy Emmerine.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, moving on to approving the board minutes. May I have a motion to approve the board meeting minutes from our last meeting, which was May 17th, 2023?
I'd like to make.
May I have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay. Is there any discussion about the board meeting minutes, any changes, any updates, anything that we need to talk about before approving? Okay, good. Okay, may I have a vote? All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye, and I am also an aye. Okay. Moving on to the next matter on the agenda is the policy matters. So we'll go back again to Marcia Waters, the division director.
The board members, we don't have any policy matters on your agenda today unless you have something that you would like to place on your agenda for the next meeting.
Does anybody have any suggestions?
No.
Okay. I think we're good. Okay, thank you. So next is public comment. Any person may bring their concerns or matters not on the agenda before the board. Speakers are requested to limit their remarks to 2 minutes unless allowed additional time by the board. Has anyone signed up to speak to the board today, Mr. Turner?
They have not, Madam Chair, but if anybody would like to address the board, just hit your hand icon, raise your hand, and we'll call your name and unmute you.
We'll give them a second.
And Madam Chair, does not look like anybody raised their hands.
Okay, that's good to know. Okay, so before we jump into complaint matters, our complaint matters that are on the agenda, I wanted to consider possibly going into executive session. Does the board feel that you have any questions regarding these two complaint matters that we should possibly discuss? Does anybody have any questions that should be discussed?
I do not.
And these are legal questions or concern cases.
Yes, legal questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I don't.
I do not.
Okay, if you're feeling confident, we'll move straight into our complaint matters and we'll go straight to our investigators.
Good morning. The first is complaint matter A, complaint number 2023-851. On May 2nd, 2023, the division received an anonymous complaint concerning the respondent's guilty plea to felony theft. The respondent was convicted of theft between $20,000 and $100,000, a class 4 felony. The respondent was granted an 18-month deferred sentence and was ordered to pay $476.50 in court costs. The costs have been paid and the deferred sentence is ongoing with an expected completion in March of 2025. The conviction was not disclosed to the division. The matter was disclosed as pending charges in the NMLS registry and has not been updated to reflect as a conviction. Possible violations include 1210-713-1N, 1210-713-1P, 1210-711-2B, 1210-713-1M, 1210-711-2C, and Rule 5.23. Disciplinary recommendations are a final agency order, revocation, and a fine of $5,000. And Investigator Martinez can answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, thank you very much, Nicole.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's open this up for discussion. Immediate thoughts and opinions.
Yeah, I'll jump in first. This was extremely sad to read about. Extremely sad background, extremely sad consequences of what ended up happening. kind of a tugging at your heart type thing. But that being said, we have a class 4 felony, and we, as a board in our bylaws, we don't have any tolerance for that. I guess, and that's that rule 1210-711 2C. Convicted of a felony within 7 years. I mean, that's a dead ringer done. So I guess the only thing we might want to also bring up for conversation is the 18-month deferred sentence and how it's going to be completed in 2025. And I don't know if there's a way that, we recommend that she try to reapply at that point. So that, I mean, that's kind of where I'm coming from, is we have to follow our bylaws, and our bylaws say, felony within 7 years. Is the deferred sentence going to remove the felony? I guess we won't know. We don't know that. What are your thoughts?
Thank you for bringing that up, Cindy, because I feel very similar to what you're saying exactly. I feel really bad about this one, especially in terms of revocation. Any and all other fines and or disciplinary actions I would be okay with. I just feel really bad about having to revoke the license of this person who clearly it was very clear why she was doing this, and I don't know any other mother that wouldn't probably try the same thing. So this is a difficult one for me. I feel really bad about it, and I wanted to discuss it. Everybody's thoughts.
Well, I go ahead, Marcia.
Did you want to also maybe, because you've got the revocation that you have to deal with, do you want to maybe give her the opportunity to surrender her license so that she doesn't have the double whammy of having a felony on her record, and then at least during the duration of her deferred sentence, but then also the revocation?
I think that's a wonderful idea. I appreciate you mentioning that, Marcia. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. This is a really bad situation, but the rules are the rules. And, I am a little uncomfortable that, it was money that was taken and used for purposes that it was not allowed to be used for. And then, basically she lied about it. So I understand what the situation that she was in that caused her to do that. But from a kind of a public protection perspective, it concerns me.
I agree. To actually create fraudulent 529 stuff, that shows me like more of an intent thing. And it is a very bad situation, but you still can't skirt that to me. So,
yeah, it's somewhat conflicting because I do understand, and it is a sad situation, but yeah, creating fake documents is never acceptable.
Yeah, it was an act of desperation, in my opinion, and can't be done. People could consider other acts of desperation in doing, such egregious things in regards to the rules that we have to follow, and that's our job, is to protect the public. So I think we're all 100% in agreement. So it's just a matter of determining the exact disciplinary recommendations, and maybe taking Marcia's suggestion into consideration, that we add the opportunity for her to withdraw her license rather than suffer the revocation on the record. Would we feel comfortable with that?
Yeah, I think that would be appropriate.
I would too. And again, the sadness of it, she seems like a smart lady too. She's on so many boards and so involved, and it's like, how did she get that far down that hole? Is really sad. I would be inclined to not fine her you know, I know it's a recommendation to fine her for $5,000, but I think, you know, the real fine is going to be to have her suspend her or withdraw her license. I would be inclined to move towards that, but again, open to, you know, what you all think.
Well, and it looks like the documentation itself shows a fine of 1,000. So I'm not sure, Nicole, if
Okay.
the 5,000.
Okay, well, the one I'm looking at shows a fine of 5,000 for, we typically do the maximum for each violation. And there are 5. So I apologize if you don't have the same one I'm looking at.
Yeah, I also have the one that shows 1,000 and it actually shows 2 violations only.
It's only 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I like the compromise idea of allowing her to withdraw. I feel that as far as setting a precedent goes, we need to assess some kind of fine. Maybe not 5,000, but 1,000, because I just think it's a precedent. She is in a bad situation. But is it up to us to assess every situation? That would be a tough thing to do. You know, which situation is worse than the next? I mean, obviously that is true, but I'm rambling a little. I feel like there should be some kind of fine.
Yeah, and that's well said. And I can get on board with that as well. The 1,000 in lieu of 5,000. Yeah.
Right. I would agree to that as well. I think
Me
the
too.
5,000 was a little steep.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. Do we have any further discussion? Do we want to go ahead and make a motion?
I was just gonna say, before the board made a motion, I just wanted to speak to the fact that it looks like you guys are looking at different documents as far as the staff recommendations and the referrals. And so I know when you make a motion, you usually identify the basis for the discipline before you identify the discipline. So I want to make sure whatever your motion is going to be, that you are looking at the appropriate statutory basis for the discipline that you are considering here. And Cindy, you mentioned the 12-10-7-11 2BC, which is the mandatory if you've ever been convicted of a felony within the 7 preceding years. That the basis for your motion would include that violation. And I'm not sure if the referrals that some of you got included the 12-10-7-13-1M Rule 5.23 violation that the investigator mentioned for failing to timely report the guilty plea or conviction.
No, 1P and 1N. 12-10-7-13 1P and 12-10-7-13 1N as in Nancy.
Let me rephrase them. So the one basis would be 12-10-7-13 1M as in mother, and
Okay.
that's in Rule 523, because that's 1M is for any rule or statutory violation, and the rule violation here is Rule 5.23. And then the other basis that Cindy mentioned was 12-10-7-11 2BC.
2B C 2
2B.
2B and
C.
a felony and domestic. Okay.
Right. And you also did mention the 12-10-7-13 1P, which is also a valid basis.
Okay.
And then 12-10-7-13 1N, which is conviction of or pled guilty to a specific type of crime, which this one was.
Right. Okay.
And I
so-
just wanted to coordinate those bases because it sounds like we have different documents flying about.
Yes, I agree.
Okay.
Okay.
So I hope you have those because your motion would include those statutory basis for discipline. And obviously you're still talking about what the appropriate discipline is here.
Up to BC. Okay. So that does include that, then that does add up to 5 violation statutes.
4.
4, okay.
How are we feeling about the fine? Are we feeling 1,000 or?
I would
more?
feel okay with that. I would be good with that. How about the rest of you?
I would too.
Okay,
Yeah, that'd be fine.
I'll go ahead and make a motion then. And the motion is to allow this loan officer to withdraw their license in lieu of revocation. And $1,000 fine based on the following: 1210-711 2BC, conviction of a felony within 7 years. And then Rule 5.23, 1210-713 1M like Mary, 1210-713 1P like Paul, 1210-713 1N like Nancy. And
Okay,
public censure.
and public censure. Okay.
I second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Hi.
I am also an aye. All in favor, say no. Did I hear everybody say aye? Okay. Okay.
And
Okay,
board
that,
members, just to
thank you.
clarify, you're allowing her to relinquish in lieu of revocation, but if she doesn't relinquish, then we have to proceed with revocation.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Marcia.
Thank you, Marcia.
Okay,
Okay,
then-
go ahead. Sorry. Thank you, Nicole.
sure. The next is complaint matter B, complaint number 2023-152. A complaint concerning the respondent was filed with the division on January 26th of 2023. In the complaint, it was alleged that on April 18th of 2022, the respondent provided an anti-steering disclosure, which listed a 30-year fixed rate of 2.625%. When the complainant inquired about the rate, the respondent explained that the best rate he could deliver was a 3.99%. In his written response, the respondent stated that he was acting as a broker and that the anti-steering disclosure was completed by the lender for the transaction. During the recorded interview, the lender confirmed that their system setup at the time would have I'm sorry, I got something that said mute was on. I'm sorry. During the recorded interview, the lender confirmed that their system setup at the time would have required the broker to complete the anti-steering disclosure and that the broker would have been responsible for all data contained on the form. It was also confirmed that the rate listed on the anti-steering disclosure would have not passed the qualified mortgage guidelines. During the interview, the respondent explained that he misspoke in his written response and that his disclosure was in fact completed by his assistant. The respondent accepted ownership for the error and explained that since he was licensed as a loan originator in the transaction, the accountability falls on him. During the interview with the respondent's assistant, the assistant stated that he did not complete the disclosure and that it was in fact completed by the respondent. Possible violations include 1210-713 1Q, 1210-713 1V, 1210-713 1CC, 1210-713 1M, 1210-725 1A, and disciplinary recommendations are diversion and a fine of $1,000. And Investigator Martinez can answer any questions.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Okay, so let's open it up for discussion. This one was interesting because we have sort of differing views of, sort of what happened. But the respondent, of course, is probably the one I have keyed on in regards to, he wanted to first say that it was the lender system, and then he said it was his assistant who did it, but then he agrees to take responsibility. So I honestly believe the assistant that it wasn't the assistant, and I also believe the lender that it wasn't the lender system that provided the filled out form. I believe the system provides the form, but not the filled out form. Thoughts?
From a compliance officer perspective, I had a lot of issues with his letter of explanation. I mean, essentially, he, instead of taking accountability and responsibility, he basically said that the rules are not good. And so he doesn't agree with them. And then he apologized for the confusion that the lender's interpretation of those rules caused, but we all have that same interpretation, all lenders for the most part. And so I did not appreciate that essentially he's saying that the actions were taken because the rule doesn't make sense to him. I don't appreciate that.
No, and I fully agree. And thank you for wearing your compliance hat, Jen, because hello, we're talking about compliance.
Yeah, exactly.
So yes.
Yeah. I actually, when I reviewed all this, there was a lot of documentation, but I had a lot of problems with the inconsistencies of everything because it showed 5.5, if I remember right, on the anti-steering form, but then we have 5.25 that was locked. And then when I looked at the CDs, I saw 5.125 with a discount of $7,900. So things were all over the place to me. When I lock a loan, that's what it is. It doesn't change. And I also did have an issue with him saying that his assistant filled it out. And we know that assistants that are not licensed cannot do that information. So, and then he finally took that information back and said, no, I must have done that. Plus, anything with QM, if your current rate is 5, you're never going to be able to offer 2.625 because of the pure cost basis on a primary is so limited that it's just not going to happen. So I think there was a lot of things dropped on the lender side of this for sure.
Yeah. So, yeah, it was very, very well documented and great interviews. So good job.
Yeah.
Investigation. So it's my understanding when they first came out with an anti-steering disclosure, it was so that a loan officer couldn't put a consumer in a specific loan type so that they could make more money. So example, Jay might be paying more back in the day before everything was, kind of the Wild West. And people weren't asking, the consumer what type of loan they want. They were just locking them and making more money. And that all changed with the CFPB. And now loan officers make the same on every deal based on a percentage of the loan amount. So there's no incentive for a loan officer to try to, create a rate difference. They're not going to make any more money, bottom line. So then the anti-steering disclosure changed after the CFPB got involved. And now it talks about the lowest rate available, the fixed rate with no risky features, and the fixed lowest in points. And again, the anti-steering disclosure is talking about programs. It is not a guarantee for the rate. It's a disclosure that if explained well, it's just a comparison to say, hey, Mr. Consumer, you've got options. If you want to buy the rate down, you can do it all day long. Now, yeah, 2.625 was not available and it's not QM. So that was never an option. It's unfortunate that that was on there and that the guy actually wanted that rate and wanted to pay for it. But it's not a rate guarantee. It's a disclosure. It's talking about programs. It's talking about your option. And, really good detailed loan officers are going to have that conversation up front. When they lock, it's like, you have options. Do you want to pay points? This is what it looks like. Do you not want to pay points and take a higher rate and educate them? So I come by this from a different set of eyes, saying the consumer, for him to complain and say he couldn't get that rate, it was a disclosure. He was already locked at the time. And yeah, the loan officer came back and said, if you want to buy the rate down, here's what's available today. And he didn't pick it. He didn't choose it. He was given the option. He moved forward. So I think this anti-steering disclosures is is being looked at with so much weight that he didn't lock him in at that rate. And I don't find that disclosure for that purpose of locking a rate. It's program options that the rates are tied to. Now, yeah, there's a lot of other moving parts of who filled it out, and he deals with a lot of different brokers. Some of them have them pre-filled. Some of them got to that point where the first one and the second one had to match because there's no QM, there's no risky features anymore. So, I just wanted to voice my opinion about the actual disclosure. And it's being viewed so much like you said that rate and I want that rate. And
yeah, I appreciate that, Cindy, because in my reading of all of the documents, that was one of the things that I was questioning is that I don't know why it's considered a bait and switch when it was just options, just what you said. Those were just options. So I didn't necessarily consider it a bait and switch, even in all the documentation.
Yeah, he got pretty aggressive with that and wanted to sue and but it's like, it's a disclosure. It's not a rate guarantee. It was given on a specific day, and they could have explained, the purpose of that disclosure is that you have options. And today, here are your options.
Yeah, I totally agree with that because he did lock him at 5 1/4, and that's what they all knew. But when because that disclosure comes out later in the fact. It came out after he was locked. Correct. So it's definitely not a bait and switch in my mind. It's just there's a lot of stuff in the background that was not done in my mind correctly.
Right. And, it got a little complicated too, because it didn't appraise. So he had to put more down, and that they had a lot of change of circumstances that caused a lot of paperwork. But I thought that he was very clear in his explanation to the consumer of what was going on. And, we have to do a QM, from here on out, I'm sure he'll do every anti-steering disclosure 2 points under. Just so that if it comes up and somebody's like, I want that rate, and you know what, you can have that rate. You can always change your rate and you can always buy it down. Just on a particular one, that rate was erroneous.
Mm-hmm. It was, and I'd absolutely agree with that. When you lock it, and he ultimately closed with it because obviously when he did shop, because they did a shop and lock, so you're actually protecting that rate for 90 days. Once you do that, he protected him. So he
actually gave him a good deal. And then I turned right around and did a complaint with the CFPB. I do have a question. I don't know if I saw it or not, but did the CFPB actually come back with any findings on your complaint, or was it dismissed?
So it looks like it was dismissed. Basically, the complainant was able to provide a copy of the response that the lender had actually sent over. So I did include that. I could not find on the CFPB website, searching the complaint by number and by name, I could not find a response from our originator to the CFPB complaint. However, the CFPB site does not indicate that there was any action taken. And oftentimes I find with the CFPB complaints, if it's not incredibly egregious or if there's not a pattern of continuous harm, it may not be something that they pursue.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I thought too, which also kind of lends to, this is not a foul. I mean, this loan officer did nothing to harm this consumer. This is a disclosure that talks about options and programs. And when they nailed down and said, here's what's available today, the guy wasn't interested.
And to be fair, the complainant did explain that the only rub on the entire complaint was the anti-steering disclosure.
Right.
And, we do have an email dated May 9th where the complainant is saying, we'll stick with the 5.25% that was
Yeah.
locked, and it actually closed at a lower rate. But
Yeah.
he did actually say, and this is in response to the loan originator offering the 3.99%, which was truly the lowest rate that was available. However, we do have the consumer saying, no, we'll stick with the 5.25.
Right. I mean, it almost would be like somebody issuing a loan estimate and then the borrower, you know, trying to complain because they didn't get it locked, but did they pull the trigger and say, I want this lock? You know, he was already locked. He was locked. And again, my opinion of the anti-steering disclosure is that it is not a guaranteed rate. It's a disclosure that talks about program options and how they change and how the cost of rates change.
So I totally agree that it's not a bait and switch situation, in my opinion. My only concern is all the excuses about, you know, who filled it out and whose fault was it, and why is the form is, you know, useless, blah blah blah. And I just think he did a poor job. I feel like he just maybe threw numbers on there because there's no basis for them based on the interviews. And it was just, oh, I have to fill out this document, so here we go. And I feel that's a little negligent in the way I am assuming, based on all the evidence that he went about it. I can understand from a consumer perspective that maybe someone doesn't understand that it's not a true rate, it's just a, you know, presentation of options. But because he was already locked in at a rate, you know, he'd already been locked in, like Aaron said, and he had the opportunity to go shop elsewhere. I don't see that there was harm done based on it. I do think that the loan officer should have done a better job of filling out the form.
Very well said, Shirley. Very well said. What would have made sense if he could have come back and said, you know what, I deal with 10 different lenders, and on that day, I pulled a rate sheet, here it is, and this was the lowest rate. It would have been a QM loan. You probably wouldn't have liked it, although there's no such thing as a QM loan with a rate low. But if he would have been able to document how he came up with that, that would have been helpful. So it did kind of go down a little bit of a slippery slope then with all the questions, you know, and then to say the assistant did it, and then you interviewed the assistant and they say they never do that. So there, you know, that didn't leave anybody with a good, you know, feeling about what is really the truth. But
Right.
it's a disclosure, you know, it's a disclosure. It's not a rate lock or a bait and switch, or there, you know, again, I love the way you concluded that the consumer was not harmed.
Right. And I have to sort of further add that the statement that in the complaint states that the deception will cost us approximately $150,000 over the life of the loan. I can't agree.
Yeah.
No.
They can.
Yeah, and I mean, I also agree that if it was that important, they would have paid for the lowest rate available at that time. Obviously, they didn't. But I do, based off of my understanding of what we read, that rate was never available.
That's correct.
So,
Right.
while I agree it's not a bait and switch, the loan
With that particular lender, it wasn't.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's not a bait and switch. I agree, it's not a bait and switch. However, a loan officer should know what's available and populate disclosures accurately for the borrowers. And I know you're not bound, you know, to the rates on that disclosure, obviously, but that disclosure is, here are the options available, but that wasn't an option available. So I understand there's not necessarily consumer harm in, you know, $150,000 lost over the life of the loan. And if it was that important, I think they would have paid for a lower interest rate. But I mean, to say that they're not bound by this disclosure, they are required to have an accurate disclosure that is provided to the borrower with loans that are available. And that was not an available term for that borrower.
So let me ask you, as a person who is not a licensed loan officer, if that form were to be sent out with erroneous information on it, what would you do? What would be the next step that the LO should do? Provide another one and say, my apologies, that one was, mishandled, it wasn't filled out correctly. I mean, what would you do? Because then at that point, you're risking some kind of distrust with the borrower that you sent them something and then you're sending something else. I mean, what would you do in that case? What would be the best way to handle that?
I mean, it would be good if we knew the actual truth, because remember, from the time you order disclosures till the time they go out, rates change. I mean, they're not going to change that much, but did he have one lender that possibly could have quoted that low? That's a lot of money to pay for rates, for points.
Yeah.
So just don't know the truth. I mean, I think a loan officer, when they get to that disclosure, would explain you have options. And today's options are this, what's on here is a lower rate that we can't do because of QM. If you want to look at QM, it's a different program. They would explain the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing another one since it was disclosed, because I'm of the belief you're just closing options for programs.
I see.
Absolutely. And that is always a conversation you have with your borrower. Hey, today my rate's 7%. If you want to get 6.75, here's a cost basis. And you go over that with them. But obviously $33,000 in points, what it saves you in payment does not pay you back. It never, very, very rarely would it pay you back. So that is definitely a conversation that's supposed to be had for sure.
Yeah. And I think from a regulatory perspective, Dina, because there's kind of the LO customer service piece on how to handle that for the customer, so there isn't that distrust. But from a regulatory perspective, once you've disclosed it, you can't really take it back. Okay. So it's not really a regulatory fix where the CFPB would say, oh, okay, no, forget it. Let's send a new one that's correct. You've sent the incorrect one. So I think you have the two different perspectives, the regulatory and then the customer service.
I see. And I totally see that clearly. Mm-hmm.
I mean, in my saying that I don't think that the consumer was harmed and I don't think it was bait and switch and all of that, I do think that the loan officer did a poor job here. And I think that there should be some repercussion for that. So, in terms of a fine.
Mm-hmm.
On the recommendation, can you expand on diversion?
Yeah, exactly. What would diversion consist of in the recommendation?
The board members, a stipulation for diversion basically means that if they complete the terms of that stipulation, once they're completed, the matter is considered dismissed, but it's still a matter of public record, and so it's still on file with us. So if they're required to pay a fine, once they pay the fine, then they've completed the term of the stipulation for diversion. It's dismissed, but it's still on record with us. So if somebody submitted an open records request, we would produce that document.
Okay. Okay, do we have anyone who is prepared or willing to make a motion?
And once again, I just wanted to step in before the board makes a motion, because you had a really robust discussion about this case, and there's lots of different bases that were on the referral sheet for recommended discipline. And from your conversation, it sounds like under consideration is a diversionary stipulation with the fine. I just want to make sure that your basis from a legal standpoint is accurate. And what I heard the board talking about is that their concern is that this MLO put incorrect, inaccurate information in a disclosure form. And that's really what you're focusing in on.
Correct.
Okay. So one of the potential basis that was recited to you for pursuing the discipline would be 1210 713 1cc, which is making in any manner any false statement with regard to the rates, points, or other financing terms or conditions for a residential mortgage loan. That could possibly be applicable, but you also talked about this just being a disclosure about what's available, not necessarily, what they were. So I'm not sure if you would think that would be an accurate basis, or if you really thought this lender did not comply with Regulation Z. And that's really the problem, because it was inaccurate information. And I don't know the answer to that as far as what's in the board's mind, but I'm just giving you some things to think about.
I think that's a good one. It was inaccurate in the sense that, when, the customer actually came back and said, I want that, it wasn't available. That was inaccurate,
Well, right. And all of Paul's interviews, that came across loud and clear that that rate was never available. So, yeah.
But I just for the record, I thought that he did a really good job communicating with the client, who was a tough client and threatened him. And he explained very clearly what the options were, and because of QM. So I think that the client was well informed. I don't think he tried to pull anything over. It's just there was a disclosure with a rate that didn't exist, and that's what he wants to hang on. And the anti-steering disclosure is not a guarantee for a rate. It's not.
And so I would agree with you on that and state that violation 1CC, false or deceptive statement about rates, isn't quite accurate, because I don't think that quite describes, and I don't think that's one of the violations we should consider.
And is that everybody else's opinion?
I agree.
Yeah, because he wasn't trying to pull anything over.
I don't believe that he was.
Yeah, but I don't have the other violations up. So what do you all feel would be a disciplinary action for a violation?
Well, the other two that they listed were 713-1Q, unworthiness, incompetence, and 713-1V, good faith and fair dealing, were the other two on the referral.
I think that's more of the 1Q.
Right.
Yeah, because I don't feel like he was, operating in bad faith or anything. So, yeah, I just think it was maybe sloppy work, but
1Q.
Yeah, 713-1Q, unworthiness and incompetence.
Yeah, again, incompetent is a pretty heavy word.
And it's a either or, it's unworthy or incompetent. And incompetent meaning is a mistake or an error. Do you think that he complied with the requirements of Regulation Z? And this, Jennifer, might be a more accurate assessment for you, since you're the compliance officer, whether or not you just thought that, because it was not correct, or he couldn't substantiate where he got the information from, and it seemed to be wrong, that it's just a violation of that Regulation Z, because there is a specific provision that requires him to comply with that.
I mean, I do think it was wrong. Obviously, it wasn't available to the customer, but I do think that in all of the inconsistencies, I think that he is the one that generated it. And instead of looking at it and saying, oh, that's weird, this isn't available. I know Cindy and Aaron, as loan officers, you would have looked at that and said 33,000. I know it's not going to pass QM this low of a rate. So to have not looked at that at all, and just totally bypass really looking at the disclosure and then describing it to the borrower if he did catch the error. Instead, I think that it wasn't available. He didn't look at it. And then once it was brought to his attention, then he tried to say, well, it's not available.
And I think a week or two passed, so I remember correctly that several days passed, was what I remember seeing, that several days passed from that day until the correction
Yeah, so I
stated.
think that's where, to me, the incompetence comes in, is that it wasn't an available option, which I understand errors happen on disclosures. Obviously, we see that. But to have not caught that when, we know that as a loan officer, as a seasoned loan officer, that you would catch something like that by looking at it. Having not caught it, and then having not caught it later either, and then when it's brought to his attention, then trying to say, well, it's not available. To me, that's the incompetence, is really the lack of accountability, not looking at disclosures. I mean, obviously that one, it was incorrect and the borrower felt harmed, but are there other ones where he's not looking at disclosures? To me, this is more of like he didn't look at it, so what else is he not looking at type of incompetence. That's how I'm defining incompetence.
Yeah. Well, he looked at it because he put it in there. What he doesn't have is the ability to back up where he got the information from. And again, like I said earlier, if he could have just produced a rate sheet from another lender on that day, because it can be any lender, then we wouldn't be having this conversation. So maybe that's the incompetence piece, that he didn't back up what he put out there, even, it was not available. I think that was part, being a broker, of that newer anti-disclosure, steering disclosures, that you need to be able to back up your quote. Yeah, so I would go with the incompetence of missing that piece, just throwing a rate out there really low, thinking, he's never going to take that. If it really existed with a non-QM loan, that would have been an option. Another whole conversation he could have had with them, but he could not produce that information. And it sounded like his assistant researched all lenders and couldn't find them either. But again,
and I just want to interject real quickly, because I know the board is considering this unworthiness or incompetence, and the full statutory provision, the Q, is having demonstrated this unworthiness or incompetence by conducting business in such a manner as to endanger the interests of the public. That is the full statutory violation. And I know you're focusing on the incompetency prong right now. I just wanted you to have the benefit of the full violation versus the failure to comply with the regulation Z in the disclosure form.
which one is that? Failure to comply.
12-10-725-1A is the statutory provision that requires MLOs to follow regulation Z. And then you have a disciplinary violation that says all MLOs have to follow all the statutory provisions. And so if he violated the requirements for the truth in the disclosure at issue here, then that's a potential basis for violation. And I know you guys are considering a diversion stip and a fine, so it's not a really heavy, it's not a revocation type, but I just want to make sure that we have a solid and sound basis for your the discipline under consideration here.
Okay, so
Yeah.
just to confirm, I'm sorry, that's 12-10-725-1A. And is that right,
Yes.
Gina?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, and in reading that, that does seem more fitting.
Yeah, because it is
I
the
agree.
disclosure. Yeah.
I agree. Mhm.
Yep.
Okay, so
Good
then
advice.
if that is the board's belief and understanding, if you wanted to make your motion, then you would reference a violation of and I know Nicole read a lot of them for you. It's 12-10-713-1M, specifically violating 12-10-725-1A, which is a mouthful, but that's the bases.
Okay. 713-1M. I just want to look at that one really quick. Okay, well, do we have any further discussion? Would anyone like to make a motion on this, including those two violations that we determined, and considering, just like Gina said, diversion and a fine?
I'll make a motion. So I will make a motion to have a fine of $1,000 with diversion. And that's based off of 10-12-713 1N, with specifically violating 12-10-725 1A.
Just to reflect, that's M as in mother, not N.
Thank you, M.
I'll second that.
Okay. Okay, so we have a motion and we have a second. All in favor, say aye.
I,
Aye.
Aye.
And I'm also an aye. Shirley, did we hear your vote? I
Yes,
apologize. Okay,
Mhm.
thank you. I just wanted to be sure. Okay. This concludes this complaint. Thank you, everyone. Okay, moving back to the agenda. It appears that the one licensing matter that we had on the agenda has been removed. So we'll move straight into ESP matters from Penny Elder.
Good morning, everyone.
Hi, Penny.
This is case number 2022-2127. It's a matter that you reviewed at your last meeting, and it was the result of a transaction that closed in September of 2022, and the respondent had failed to make the payment to the appraiser after the closing of that. And you may recall that there was he had said that he had sent a check and on and on. It didn't get paid. The lender ended up paying it, and then he owed the money to the lender, and it just didn't get paid. You all voted to issue a final agency order, public censure, revocation, and $3,000 in fine plus the 15% surcharge. And when I reached out to him with that outcome, he did make the payment of the restitution. I'm sorry, you also had restitution in there for the amount that was due. He did make that payment. He sent in a letter to you all for your review, sort of acknowledging that he knows that, you know, he knows he made the mistake. He knows his actions were not appropriate. He is asking for consideration, reconsideration in this, and asking for this not to be a revocation. You may recall that the staff's recommendation in this matter was for a final agency order, a public censure, and a fine of $2,000. And I think after discussion, the board got to a point of revocation, and it may have in part been that I believe during the investigation, he had made an assertion that he was no longer interested in the license. He is in fact interested in the license and would like to be in the industry, and so is asking for your reconsideration.
Can you basically just allow me to remember, is this the gentleman that stopped talking to the investigators and was just like, I'm moving to Florida, I don't really care anymore? Is this the same sense?
Let me go back and
yeah,
let me go back, and I don't know if Paul is still on the line. He may be able to speak to that, but let me look really quick. Paul, is that this gentleman?
Yeah, he was going to be moving. I believe we had around the time when we completed were wrapping up the investigative report, I had spoken to him, and his explanation was that he was no longer going to be in the industry and was moving and was shutting down his business.
Thank you.
But was he wasn't like unresponsive. I thought this one.
Yeah, initially we had some difficulty reaching him, but yes, he did eventually respond and complete an interview with us. Yes, ma'am.
And he was responsive to me in the information that I sent out to him. I asked for a response within 10 days of sending that out, and he was very responsive, and we did have a, telephone conversation. And I had so he was responsive to me.
Thank you.
And I honestly, I don't know whether he is relocating out of the state or not. I just know that he did express that he did want to stay in the industry, and that, if certainly with a revocation that would follow him for forever. And he did show, he did provide proof of payment, and he also provided another example, I guess, where a similar sort of thing happened, where a payment was incorrectly dispersed, and he showed that I believe it was the same day that it was brought to his attention, he corrected it. So he was trying to demonstrate that, you know I got this one wrong, and here's an example where I got it right and I have made restitution. So
If I remember too, the person that was typically in charge of all the bill paying had left recently, so he kind of ended up, that doesn't mean that he could make all the stories about why it wasn't paid.
yeah, I don't
Yeah.
he didn't pay it. I think he,
Yeah.
you know, and you know, there was even a story where, you know, he said he had sent a check, and
Right.
I don't know what happened to that. So
Yeah.
he didn't pay it. He acknowledges he didn't pay it. He's not, you know, at least with me, he wasn't trying to blame it on some other circumstance. He didn't pay it. He was having hard times. We had the discussion of, you know, you can't make your problem someone else's problem. He did understand that, and very quickly after I spoke to him, made the restitution and then submitted this.
And it was how much? 800?
It was 800. Let me see if I can see it in there. I believe it was 800 even.
Okay.
That's what it says on the
Mhm.
on the description, the investigative summary. It
I'll
says
just
800.
throw out my opinion. I would be in favor of removing the revocation and keeping everything else in place that we had. You know, the public censure, we had a $3,000 fine. I could go with that or move it to the 2,000 that the staff, you know, recommended, plus a 15% surcharge. And let them stay licensed. That would be my opinion.
Yeah, because I think part of the problem that we had is that he still hadn't paid it.
Right.
So there's just like a total lack of concern about resolving it. And so the letter, I appreciate kind of what was said, and I appreciate that it was taken care of. So I'm actually in agreement.
I also feel the same.
Well, I wasn't here for this one, obviously. It bothers me a little bit that he didn't pay it until all this came down.
Which is why we voted for revocation in the beginning.
Yeah.
So
Well, and
yeah.
I do think that, you know, he acknowledges that.
Mhm.
And yes, it's true, until there was some significant pressure. That's what it took to finally get this thing paid. But I think him also sharing an example where a similar thing happened and he did correct it right away without any pressure from us or without having to have it escalate to that, I think is a little bit of an example of showing that he knows what to do, you know, the right thing to do. And he did do it in that instance. He didn't for whatever reason in this instance, but it is corrected now.
Okay.
And I would imagine that he realizes obviously the severity of consequences if that ever happens again. Obviously you're going to lose your license, which
I would agree with that as well.
Not heard.
Okay.
And the original recommendation again was for a final agency order, a public censure, and a $2,000 fine. And certainly that is not light discipline. You know, it is a
Right.
public censure. It will be attached to his license detail history. So it's not insignificant.
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would agree with
Okay.
the original recommendation then.
Yeah. I would
Okay.
make a motion that we offer the counter proposal and we withdraw the revocation. This is the final agency order or whatever that FOA.
Yeah.
We will have public censure and we'll do a fine of 2,000.
Do I have a second?
I'll
I
second.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
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 And I'm also an aye. Okay. And this concludes ESP matter.
Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Penny. It appears on the agenda there are no Attorney General matters, but I'll just throw it out to Gina quickly and say, are there any Attorney General matters that we need to discuss that are not on the agenda?
No, there's nothing on this agenda, but I can't promise for the next meeting, but this time you guys escaped with a nice light agenda.
Okay. Thanks for that heads up. I'll take that as a heads up.
Uh-oh, get ready.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So agenda items for the next meeting is there anything that we want to discuss or add, discuss with Marcia? Does anybody have anything on their mind? Okay, well, in that case, I would ask for a motion to adjourn this meeting.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 And I'm also an aye. This meeting is hereby adjourned. And it seems that our next scheduled meeting is scheduled for September 20th, 2023 at 9 a.m. So we will all convene then. So it's great to see all of you. Have a great rest of the week. And thank you so much for everything.
Yeah,
Good job,
thank
Board
you.
members.
Good job,
Bye, everybody.
Yeah, great job.